It affected me in that it was the biggest blow to my confidence in what was by now a 20-something plus career.
Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then do please hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. It really does help make sure these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible. I've just had a long walk and a good natter with one of Britain's top comedy talents, Fred MacAulay, a true master of the art of stand-up. Having performed at the Edinburgh Fringe 29 times, that's 29 times, Fred was a regular voice on BBC Scotland Radio for almost 18 years and now hosts on Greatest Hits Radio. Fred, who switched to comedy after a career in accountancy, of all things, has also appeared on our screens on Mock the Week, QI and Have I Got News For You. And he's no stranger to the difficulties that life can throw at us. And in this episode, he talks to me very movingly about dealing with the death of his father to cancer, his son's health battles, and his own crisis of confidence when his long-running radio show was suddenly cancelled. This episode was recorded as Fred and I enjoyed a hike in the Scottish Highlands. We are men of a certain age, so apologies for the occasional breathlessness. I hope you enjoy this conversation with a true national comedy treasure as much as I did. Fred MacAulay, welcome to Crisis What Crisis. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. We should maybe explain, in fact you might do, that we're walking in the hills of Perthshire, so I don't know how many years I have on you, but I might be a little bit out of breath now and again, Andy.
I think there might be a bit of wheezing on both our behalves, Fred, if I'm honest. It's a glorious, if slightly cloudy day.
Yeah.
Yep. And we're strolling in the hills, as you say, above Loch Tay, one of the most beautiful spots in Scotland, and not far from where you grew up, right?
That's right. So my first 3 years or so were in a place called Callander, which you would pass through if you were coming off the A9, towards Killin, where I started primary school. Had 2 years here. Dad was the village bobby. So I know this area pretty well, having lived here and having visited it regularly over the years.
So as a result of your dad being a policeman, you dotted around a fair bit, didn't you?
We did.
Yeah. How was that as a kid?
I think it was pretty positive, Andy, because I was at 4 different schools. So you go through all the saying goodbye to people that you think you're going to be friends with for the rest of your life. You get dropped in, you're the new boy. So that happened 3 times. So you've got to, I guess, learn some social skills.
Yeah.
Even at a tender age.
So it's something we say a lot, isn't it, about our kids, is that they're kind of born with a resilience.
Yeah.
You're of that school of thought. You were a resilient kid?
Fairly resilient, yeah. I was not a team sport player for various reasons. So yeah, I was resilient. I wasn't somebody that got into many fights as a boy, maybe 1 or 2.
Talk your way out of them, one would imagine. I don't know whether that's
no,
right.
That's the old cliche.
Yeah, it is a cliche.
You get a smart mouth.
Apologies.
Yeah. But I was in senior school and a bunch of guys, and humour and laughter was a common currency.
Yeah.
And I know lots of people will do that and we'll have a similar story, but maybe I was the only one that wanted to take it further.
Right. Do you remember the moment?
Gosh. Not the exact moment of deciding to do something about it.
Yeah.
But the exact moment of doing it was 19th of May 1988.
Oh my goodness, you do remember?
I do remember. It was a So You Think You're Funny competition, which is still going strong in Edinburgh and around the UK. This one was in Glasgow, and as my late friend Kenny Harris used to say, in Glasgow it's called So You Think So You Think You're Funny. Well, you fucking aren't. Right? Prove it. But yeah, that was my first 5 minutes on stage holding a microphone. I didn't get a place in the heat, but I knew on my way home that life has changed.
Yeah.
I just felt I felt at home, you know, I felt...
Instantly.
This is, oh, absolutely.
Let's just backtrack a bit. Your dad's job, presumably,
Yeah.
immersed him in crisis, if you like, I imagine on a number of occasions. You know, he was a policeman.
Yep.
It's all part and parcel of the job, right? I mean, did that come into the home, or was he a kind of leave it at the door kind of dad?
I would say, whether it was deliberate or not, it was left at the door. So, for example, Cullen, Dad's patch was the village itself and then road accidents. So he would leave winter, and winter in the 60s, Andy, up here was pretty extreme. A lot of road traffic accidents. And he would leave on his motorbike to go and attend these things.
Yeah.
So we knew that he was away, we knew he would come home and we'd be wet and cold. But it was never discussed what he'd been to see or what the outcome was. But so I think, yeah, he kept it pretty much to himself.
So you're an outdoor man, Fred.
Yeah.
You love your skiing, golf, fishing.
Yeah.
Presumably a lot of that flowed from your dad.
Absolutely did, and clay pigeon shooting as well. Dad used to, when he was ill with, he had a horrible cancer, mesothelioma, and when he was ill with that, I used to go up and visit him in the hospice, and he urged me to pick up a shotgun, because he'd had guns.
How old were you at this stage, Fred?
That'd be 22, 23 years ago, so early 40s.
Right.
And he had latterly worked at Glen Eagles Hotel, and he suggested I go along and join the shooting school there. And I thought, well, if he thinks it's a good idea, I'll take the word of a dying man and give it a go. Enjoyed it.
And I've been shooting since.
Yeah.
That must have been a very difficult time for you.
It was, Andy.
For the whole family, I know.
Yeah. Dad had prostate cancer. He'd had radiotherapy. Seemed he was on the mend. And then he got this terrible pain round the back of his upper back, and biopsied. And it was related to asbestos inhalation, which he had done as a young man out of the army, did his national service, worked for the railway, had been involved in hammering this white compound into some units, and he could remember puffs of white smoke coming up, and it was asbestos.
Oh, jeez.
And 51 years later it killed him.
Right.
So that was grim. Yeah.
Your approach to, if you don't mind me asking, Fred, your approach to grief, one imagines you're still, in a way, grieving for your dad, I'm sure.
Oh. Well, just recently I had a pal who lost his mum and was saying, you know, I still think, months on, I still think, oh God, I wish Mum knew about that. And I said, well, sadly that never goes. You're always thinking, you know, if it's a kid graduating or if it's the birth of a grandchild,
yes,
you just think, oh, I wish Mum and Dad were here for that, you know. So I'm pretty soft. I'm pretty soft, I would say, despite saying a bit resilient at school days. Managed to speak at Mum's funeral. I stumbled through what I wanted to say at Dad's, but luckily my brother is a much more stable individual. He was a director of social work. He took on the role of the big brother,
right? Very
much, you know, when we were at that stage in the family grief.
Yeah. It's interesting that you use the word soft, Fred.
Yeah.
And that you also use the word, well, you use the word stable, but what you mean is that you were somehow unstable. What's that all about? Is that the stoicism, you know, is an interesting thing, often mischaracterised as sort of stiff upper lip, when it's much, much more than that. Do you see yourself really that way? I mean, what you were really is, and what you are is open to it and sensitive to it and aware of it. And
yeah, maybe that's the word. Maybe sensitive is the word. I got caught just recently. I was doing a Q&A with my old pal Rory Bremner, and he threw it open to the floor, and somebody said, oh Fred, we were up in Harris and we went to the distillery and we saw a cask, and it had Fred MacAulay written on it, 2016. Is that you? And I tried to explain why I'd bought this cask of whisky, and it's because the distillery was 2 miles from where my grandfather was born.
Right.
So I've got a great affinity with the Isle of Harris, a place I don't get up to nearly enough. And as I was answering that, I choked. You know, just out of nowhere. Just out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And we'd had 50 minutes of laughs aplenty, you know, and I wondered if it was the sort of reverse of what often happens at a funeral, where you've got people dealing with the death of a relative or a good friend, but you get a relief laughter when something moderately funny is discussed. And I was thinking, here's something where we've had laughter for 50 minutes and then a kind of very personal story. And I thought, I wonder if that's the yin and yang of it.
Yes.
It was interesting.
During difficult times, we'll talk about, you know, some others, but that is a sharpest of circumstances, you know, when you're in grief.
Yeah.
Your sense of humour, I suspect, has been a key factor for you. And we've talked a lot on this podcast, actually, about because that conversation can easily fall into cliche, right?
Yeah.
Oh, just keep smiling. But actually, we've had a fair few conversations with people about the genuine strategic benefit of keeping a sense of humour. It's almost kind of, you know, it's a chemical thing.
Yeah.
It's medicinal.
Well, I tried to write up...
You hold to that?
Sorry, I was going to say, I would try to write up a thought, you know, now that we've got grandchildren, that possibly the only thing that is inherent, and I know it's not, but to me it was kind of vital, was the laughter of a baby. You can't teach laughter.
Yeah.
Where does that come from, you know? You'll get tears from them if they fall and bump their head, stub a toe, stand on a bit of Lego, although it's usually adults that do that. But laughter, must come from the soul.
Fred, you did well at school. Good with numbers especially.
Yeah. Okay. Did okay. Grafted.
Suspect you're being modest. You head to Dundee University.
Yep.
A degree in accountancy and jurisprudence.
Yes.
And the road ahead appears to be pretty clear, seems to be pretty set.
That's right.
You become an accountant. Just tell me a little bit about your state of mind at that point in your life.
It's 1978. I'm out of university. We're not a wealthy family. My brother and I both went to uni. My sister went into banking. We'd had to... you were meant, in those days, you got a grant and you were meant to get a parental contribution. I know this is going way back. But Duncan and I had to finance ourselves through uni, which I think was a mechanism my parents used just to give us a sense of worth, I suppose. Mm. Came out of uni and I thought, I need to get a job. I've got a degree in accountancy. I joined a small firm in Perth, went back, stayed at home, mistake, failed my CA exams and thought, right, this is an experiment that hasn't worked. I need to flee the nest. And luckily a job came up in Aviemore, assistant accountant for the chairlift company, and that's where I headed off. That coincided with me meeting Aileen, who was a medical secretary in Glasgow. So I packed my bags, moved south, got another job as a company accountant in a retail group. And the state of mind was just get a job, get some income, maybe get a car, we'll maybe see about getting a mortgage, and everything just...
Stability, really, is what you
100%.
Were shooting for.
Yep.
Right.
Good bunch of friends and relatives, all pretty much in the same boat, you know, young, reasonably well employed.
Bright bunch, enjoying life.
A lot of Aliens family, dentists, doctors.
Right.
So were the pals.
Yeah.
And then, with 2 kids around, came the 30th birthday, and a memory that at the age of 20, I'd thought, while at uni, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And you were asking about the moment earlier.
Yeah.
This was over the period of my 30th birthday, I thought, that was a quick decade. And if the next decade is as quick, I'm going to be 40, and I've done nothing about this.
But had the comedy kind of bug not bitten or shown itself, I should say, in any way prior to this, other than obviously being a naturally funny bloke, and in the way that you described earlier?
If you were to ask Alien and others that were around me at that time, I think they would say we could see it, in a situation. If there's maybe a dozen of you out, I would try and hold the floor,
Right. Okay.
But just with banter.
But what's sitting behind this then? Is it that feeling that you got when being a funny bloke, albeit in a social environment, you got a lift from it? Obviously, there's possibly something chemical for you going on in terms of an audience's reaction, even if it was around a dinner table.
Yeah, there was that.
You felt that, but is it also? Can I ask? Because it seems from a distance to be that often with comics, there's a risk thing as well going on. There's an attraction to the, because it is fundamentally, isn't it? Tell me if I'm wrong. A game of risk, right? You don't know if people are going to laugh. You don't know if your new set of material is actually going to work. It's a fundamentally risky endeavour, isn't it?
Yep, it is.
So what's your relationship with risk, Fred?
Well, I think the desire to be not just successful, but the desire to be enjoyed or admired on stage overcomes any downside to the risk side of the equation. I think I was lucky that late 80s, early 90s, I went down. I was a different voice. I was somebody that had a few years of experience behind me. People were prepared to listen.
So the storytelling was I suppose you need to hesitate to use the word unique, but the storytelling was filling something.
Yeah.
Filling a new hole, if you like.
It's a combination of who you are, what you look like, how you sound, and what the material is.
Yeah.
And pretty soon worked my way up the sort of ranks in the Comedy Store in London.
I just want to go back to that specific date that you mentioned in the first gig. It was the holding of the microphone. There was a sort of physical element to it.
Amazing that you say that, because it totally was. And I just thought, standing with that, I thought,
this is me.
This is what comedians do. Yeah. Right? I've got all the apparatus now, and the apparatus is just a microphone, right? And it was just like the missing link. And of course it gives your voice a power as well when you speak through it. Something I've never forgotten, because in LA, any club gig where there's a potential for heckling, you've got the mic.
Yeah.
You're the man, you're the guy that should be in control.
But risky. Risky, Fred. Even the heckling bit,
oh,
right?
God. And I mean, and any comic you speak to, I don't know how many you've spoken to in your podcast, but any comic will tell you that dying on your arse is horrific. And that's the big downside. And then you have to pull yourself up and go and do the next gig. And for us, as the comics, our period of recovery can be as little as 24 hours. We'll have another gig on the Friday, or, you maybe had a stiff one on the Thursday, but you're back out you're on stage on the Friday, so you've got a chance to pull it back. So your short-term memory just gets wiped.
Tell me about one of those moments.
Oh, God. Well, there's only been two. No. The worst one came quite late in my career. Oh, I'll tell you one. The late, great Malcolm Hardy used to have a place in the East End called the Tunnel Club before he opened up the creek.
Yeah.
And I got a gig in the Tunnel Club, and I got hummed off. Hummed off, yeah. I told a really dreadful gag, and the audience were regulars, and they could smell blood.
Right. Awful as in just not funny, or awful as in bad taste?
I'll tell you what it was.
Across the line?
I said, right, I maybe used the wrong place. I said, You find me in a good mood today because my bowels moved. I said, they've gone to Inverness. Right, so maybe if I'd said Dartford, I might have survived. Right, I thought it was a decent gag.
You stood the test of time, Fred, I think. Yeah.
And then
And
there's
that
just
just,
this-
and you immediately.
oh yeah, and I
Right.
clocked it. And it was early in my career, but I knew, right, it's the Colosseum, you're the gladiator, you've just lost your spear.
Yeah.
Get off. So I said, all right, okay, thanks. You win. Put the mic back in the stand. Was walking
Those
off.
are your words, were they? You win.
You win.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, there's guys in the front row going, oh, where are you going? Game's not up yet.
I paid my money.
So,
How did you feel backstage?
pretty grim. I mean, we were in the middle of nowhere. Scottish bloke and his young wife, well out of our depth, so we could, and then we had to walk a long way to get a taxi. It wasn't a very pleasant part of town. So that was one.
But I mean, emotionally, Fred. Right?
Emotionally.
I mean, there's the dealing with it straight away. Let's get out of here,
Right.
as quick as we can.
Okay.
I'm sure your dominant thought was, I need to get my wife out of here, and we just need to get,
Yeah.
just get away. But actually, the sort of impact on you.
Okay, no, I know why you're interested in that, but I was going to say it didn't have that much of an effect on me, but on the train back home the next day, I wrote a 6-page letter to the person that booked me,
Right.
telling them that they were useless at their job. There's no way I should have been booked for that gig. It was entirely their fault, and also I didn't get paid. So it was much more elaborate than that. That was, and it's to a good friend. Thankfully, we've stood the test of time.
Right.
But there's never been a stage of my career, early, middle, or late, where I've come off and thought, "Well, that's it."
So how much of that letter, looking back so many years ahead, how much of the content of that letter was actually justified?
Well,
When you look at
for
it.
a novice, yeah, it wasn't a gig that a novice should have done. I mean,
Right.
you were cannon fodder, and I was angry at that. But it's all about learning, I suppose. I maybe learned a lot. But I'll move on, Andy, to the second one.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Which was at a golf day at Gleneagles Hotel, and it was full of sporting superstars, and they'd played 36 holes of golf. These are the excuses coming out early.
Yeah.
They were knackered. There were some old men in there, and I was due to go on after dinner. They said it would be about 9:45.
Right.
That's fine. Drinks were at 7:30. So I'm thinking, right, 7:30, they've got to have their drinks.
That's
they've
a
got to
lot
go
of
and have dinner.
That's a lot of drinking.
It's not going to happen. And some of them were still coming down from their showers at about 8:30. And I said, I think I should just pull a chair up here, stand in it, and do 10 minutes in this room before they go through. No, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. Well, it was nearly midnight by the time I got up.
Oh, jeez.
And I died on my hoop. And
From the get-go?
Oh, I started with the two big gags, right? The big guns.
Yeah.
Get them on my side. Nothing. Absolute flatline.
Can you give me one of those guns?
Yeah. It's. I think tonight's going to be fine. I've done enough good gigs and bad gigs to know an audience. You're going to be a good audience. Toughest gig I ever did was 2003. I was asked to go out to Iraq to entertain the troops. That was a tough gig. Naively, I'd assumed they would have been the UK troops. Those Iraqi boys, no sense of humour. Right?
And just what?
Nothing.
Tumbleweed.
All tumbleweed, the whole thing. So I get through maybe 12, 15 minutes. Thanks very much. Sat down to...
The worst sound in the world.
and we're at table one, middle of the front of the room. I can't get out of the room. Then there's an auction. What I was going to say was the silence got so intense while I was on that at one point Nigel Mansell woke up. He was sound asleep but the utter silence dragged him from his reverie to see what on earth, what catastrophe.
And so tell me, you're on stage, right? You're a successful comic. You had an amazing career, but you're in this room full of some impressive individuals, it sounds. And you're seeing this kind of unravel in front of your eyes whilst also trying to perform. Just tell me how you managed that process. Never mind the fact that it was, for you, a memory of failure.
Yeah.
Actually, on one level, it's an incredible memory of success, because the resilience that's required to stand on your legs and just keep going is something else, actually. It's a proper lesson in resilience. I mean, when you're... and you've thankfully not been in that situation very often, but when you're in that situation, how do you manage it? What are you saying to yourself? What's the Fred operating system?
Well, reboot. Switch off and switch back on again.
I mean, were you trying to just sort of dance around a bit with your material, trying to find something to get them going? Is that what you do? Do you kind of go through the back catalogue?
No, do you know this? The rest of it is a blur. But there is a physical element to it, and I don't know if you ever, in public speaking yourself or watching others, hear the clicking of a dry tongue on a dry roof of the mouth.
Yes.
Because your salivary glands, well, they've gone to Inverness to join your bowels. they're off ski. You just see them thinking, you're going nowhere with this, mate. We're off. We'll be at the bar.
Yeah.
So that you're just standing, trying to keep as coherent as you can.
Breathing, important.
Breathing's important, but your brain goes into free fall and you think, right, okay, this next bit has got a great punchline. Best thing to do is abbreviate the setup.
Yeah.
And then you realise as you're stumbling towards the punchline that you've missed out a vital element on which the punchline depends.
Yes.
So that dies. And the other thing is, and this must be the comic brain, is until you finally say, well, that's all for me, right up to that minute you're thinking, I'm going to get them. I'm going to pull this back.
That's the resilience.
That's it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. There was another moment in my career, Andy, that I decided to come off the circuit because I'd been offered a daily morning radio show.
Yes, I want to talk about that.
And that had one big word over it, home.
Yes.
And that was an even bigger decision than going into stand-up.
Yes, well, let's talk about that.
Okay.
Because it led to the most incredible success, a show of real longevity, and that became part of the fabric of Scottish life.
Oh, you're kind.
Well, it did. So that decision really is come and host a morning show, daily morning show. On one hand, you can look at a comic's life and say, well, of course it's easy for them to then switch across to radio, but actually a very, very different discipline, right?
Totally different.
I mean, storytelling, but in a totally different way, a totally different cadence, but also a high wire as well, again, but in a different way. I had a conversation on the pod very recently with Christian O'Connell, who was obviously a very successful morning host here, and he up sticks from here and
went to
reinvented himself in Australia. Now has the #1 show in Australia.
Jeez.
And he described his life as being a sort of daily dance with death, that he's one sentence away from being cancelled, every time the show starts. But your show had a lovely pace to it, but still that risk was there, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because, well, the other thing was the slot that I was given. Nobody had ever done more than 3 years. But this was 97, and they said, look, Fred, generally this is a 3-year gig, but we want to carry us over the millennium. So it's going to be a 5-year gig. And I did 18.
Astonishing.
Yeah. And but as I said, the big word over it all was back home. Ian, my youngest, was 7. He honestly broke my heart every time I packed my bag and jumped in the car or went down to the airport. He'd just wrap his arms around my leg and, don't go, Daddy.
You got 3 kids, right?
3 kids, yeah. And so that was a big decision at that time. And, 5 years on the circuit, probably long enough. I had just been offered, I got offered in the same week, the radio show and to host the 11 o'clock show for Channel 4, which I had done the pilot series of. And that was going to be 20 weeks in London.
Right.
And I just thought, no, enough's enough. So I took the radio show, and then, and this must have been karma of some sort, I got given the co-hosting job of BBC Scotland's TV show. They'd had a chat show with Nicky Campbell as the host. Nicky gave it up. BBC Scotland wanted to keep it going, and a young researcher called Esme Frayne at a BBC meeting, one of these, I don't know what you would call it, just throwing ideas around.
Yeah.
Said,
I think the BBC would call it a blue sky session or something similar, friend.
That would be it, yeah. Not in Scotland though, it'd be a grey sky session. So they said, right, we want a chat show, who can we get? And by 96 I'd had 3 pretty successful one-man shows at the Fringe. Ali was doing a bit of media and coming towards the end of his football career, and she said, why don't we do a co-hosting job with Fred and Ali? And the head of the department said, brilliant idea, threw budget money at her and said, go and make a pilot. And we did the pilot, and we got the green light straight away. And by autumn 97, Ali and I were on air. So morning radio show in the morning, show with Ali in the evenings.
You're flying.
And Hat Trick, who make Have I Got News For You, came up with a show called The Best Show in the World Probably, which was a clip show about advertising. And Alan Davis was a team captain, I was the other team captain. I was recording that on a Wednesday, I was doing MacAulay on a Thursday. I was absolutely flying. And I thought, well, decision well made.
Yeah, superb. Were you interested, you strike me as someone who is interested in the business bit of show business. Are you interested in the way the game has changed and the opportunities that's thrown up, but also some of the challenges and difficulties as well?
Maybe not as much as others. My attitude was very much go do the gig and see what comes of it, Right. Whereas I know people that could tell you the first, middle and surname of every commissioning editor in the BBC,
Right.
People took who the exec directors were and what kind of format of comedy they were looking for. I just think, well, I'm busy, I'm happy, it's all good.
So the 3 mediums, stand-up, TV, radio, the one you felt most at home with?
Stand-up.
Always been stand-up.
First and foremost, still to this day. Nothing better, Andy.
Did you feel at home on the radio?
Eventually. It took a while because as you said earlier, it's a very different discipline, and it took me a while to settle into it. And it wasn't a long show, it was 90 minutes, but there was a funny story, because I'd been doing it for about 5 years, and one of my mates said to me, who's it picks the music for your show? And I said, there's no music. Oh, right, okay, I must listen sometime. Right? So
found out.
Yeah. So it took me a while, and it was a kind of magazine show, so we were speaking to anybody that's bringing out a book or a DVD, or there's a new TV show getting launched. Then you do a bit of the, stuff that might be of interest to people that are, knitting or crafts or self-care, that kind of stuff. One of my favourite memories was we had the last half hour of the show, we had James McAvoy and Irvin Welsh live in the studio.
Right.
And we had 25 minutes of what I reckoned was just radio gold, right? They were great, they were funny, they were talking about the experiences of making the filth, and they had to go to another radio appointment, and the last 5 minutes of the show was filled with me speaking to a podiatrist about cleaning between your toes.
All human.
Oh my God! Yeah. I just thought, well, I just imagined there would be somebody sitting listening, with 5 minutes to go, thank goodness he's got rid of those two idiots and we can talk about my toenails.
Fred, the show ended, I think I'm right in saying, sort of quite abruptly in 2015.
Yep.
Did you see that coming?
No. Complete bolt out the blue. And our mutual friend, Ellis Watson, I don't know if you want to include that, but Ellis was
always include Ellis.
He was pretty much the first person I phoned.
Right.
Because it was a big thing, right? And there was a lot of news. Fred MacAulay's shows getting axed, and Ellis was great. And he said, right, first thing you have to realise is this is not personal, right? Now you're nodding your head. We're nearly 10 years past that date. It was impersonal, right?
Does it still feel personal?
No, I can joke about it because I'm back behind the mic on Greatest Hits Radio in Scotland. Yeah. And as Aileen said, when I told her the show was coming off, she said, there's been a lot of times you've come home and said, I think I'll pack this in. I said, yeah, no, but that would have been my decision. It's when it's somebody else's decision that it's a boot in the nuts.
That's what it was about for you, was
it?
It was the loss of control.
Yeah, and whether you were rightly or wrongly thinking it's a sense of injustice, that's what I thought it was. Our numbers were good. We had a brilliant team, and that was the other thing about it, was a lot of that team then dispersed, and they'd been together a long time as well, so...
And it was badly...
Big change.
Because often these moments that come along in a career... it's the handling of them that's as important as the fact of it itself. And the handling was bad?
Yeah, very bad. I mean, it was 10 words spoken.
Face to face or on a...
Yep. Or roughly, I think something like, I'm changing the schedule and I'm taking your show off air. And that was that. So... And then there was nothing in writing ever, which led to a bit of contractual angst towards the end. Right.
And no real explanation as to the thinking?
Just they wanted to change I can't remember exactly what it was. They said they wanted maybe it to become a bit more political, or I think it was they'd done market research, thought it was time for a change. But the two guys behind it, neither of them were at the station 18 months after. Right. Both gone. Right. And then the person whose ultimate decision it was, they weren't around much longer after I had that either.
So this happens to you, in the sort of danger zone of men's health. Fred, right?
Yeah.
We've talked again in previous conversations on this podcast about that phase of your life.
Yep.
Where a moment like this actually can cause, can be very damaging. I mean, in terms, without getting airy-fairy about it, because I know that's not your inclination, but how did it affect you?
It affected me in that it was the biggest blow to my confidence in what was by now a 20-something plus career. 2014, I did a show at Edinburgh Fringe, and I would say it was probably one of the best shows I've done. Packed out the room, great reviews and all the rest of it. 2015, which would have been 5 months after I came off air, I was pretty shit. Nothing much was happening on stage. There was no spark. Numbers started to dwindle.
You were struggling for material.
I was struggling for material, yeah. As much as it has been now as it ever was in my career, finding new material, trying to come up with new stuff, maybe take a different angle and things. A lot had changed in Scottish politics. 2014 had been the big referendum year. That gave me a lot of material. Mm-hmm. Some TV things would come along, New Year stuff. And it wasn't like I disappeared. There was always still
enough
plenty
to
of work.
The and then suddenly you feel something, hang on a second, there's something going on in here.
The shows are going well, and you find, finding a new routine is the greatest buzz in stand-up. Sometimes and I love the improv as well, going on stage with the nuts and bolts of something and then just trying to connect it all together while you're on stage. So you go on with an idea, a concept, and if you've got a nice audience, an appreciative audience, it gives you the chance to. It gives you the thinking time. You know, people talk about timing in comedy. The main bit of timing is thinking.
Yeah.
And the thinking time comes when you've got a roll of laughter.
Yeah.
And you think, all right, I can tag something else on to the end of this, and it'll just, it's right up to the wire, and then something will come out.
I was reading Jimmy Carr's book last night.
Right.
And he makes the case for stand-up as training for life, something that we touched on earlier in the conversation. That in essence, to be a good comic, you have to be entirely comfortable with failure. Because that's the process, right? Constant trial and error, as you've just been saying with your material. You agree with that, I assume. And is that were you able in that difficult period? Were you able to remind yourself of that? Actually, this is the job.
Yeah.
Failure is a fundamental part of the job.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know about being comfortable with failure. It's maybe about rationalising it and realising that it is part and parcel of what goes on. I mean, Jimmy's approach to comedy is very different from mine. Jimmy's a machine. I've often likened putting bits together as like a jigsaw. So you've maybe got a line that works, and then the next 4 lines down, that could slip in after that, and then you piece it all together, and then it becomes a 15-minute bit.
Fred, you've raised so much for charity over the years. I'm going to spare your blushes a bit, but for some causes I know that are quite close to your heart. I mean, prostate cancer.
Yeah.
I know with Dad and with
my brother as well.
Diagnosed again. With your brother, must have been terribly difficult. You're close, right? And it's
yeah, we are. And again, as I said earlier about the progress that has been made with cancer treatments, mesothelioma being the one we mentioned. Prostate cancer. My brother, I think, is now. He must be pushing on for 9 years since diagnosis, and he had a treatment called brachytherapy, where they just kind of put radioactive seeds into the prostate, blitzes the cancer out. He is kept going with hormones, tablets of all sorts, and he's in good nick. I was golfing with him yesterday.
Great.
So yeah, prostate cancer is one that I've helped out with. We've got diabetes type 1 in the family.
One of your children, I think,
that's right.
Yeah,
Jack.
Yeah.
And that was a challenge. Poor Jack had a reaction to alcohol, so he'd gone through his teenage years with this dreadful multiple injections every day, pricking his finger, doing blood tests.
Yeah.
And then he gets to the stage where his pals are starting to have a pint or two, and Jack wasn't able to drink. So I made a wee pact with him and I stopped drinking for a couple of years.
Right.
Then, as his body developed, he was then able to cope with alcohol, rather too well at some times. And then some guys that I know who were in the catering industry, hospitality, had a space on a climb up Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
So I got sponsorship for diabetes research at Dundee University and climbed up Killy with these guys. And one of my late buddies, great chef Andrew Fairley, I summited with Andrew, which was a very emotional time. He had stopped chemotherapy for a brain tumour to climb Killy. Yeah, how about that for balls?
Oh my goodness.
Eh?
Yeah,
Jesus.
well, we talked about stoicism earlier.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
what a man.
Incredible demonstration of it.
Yeah.
I suppose it's the same question, but from a different angle. We've talked a bit about how you managed with your own moments of difficulty, but when it's others, particularly your family members, your son, how did you manage to keep the game face on? Because obviously you're working through that period. You're on the road, presumably.
Yep.
How do you get that state of mind in the right place before you step on stage, Fred?
When you've had
when you've got difficult stuff going on in your life, yeah.
I honestly don't know. It's I was when Mum was ill. She was terminally ill. I got a phone call at 6 a.m. to say, "Look, you'd better get up to Perth." And I got about halfway up and they phoned again and said, I'm terribly sorry, Mr. MacAulay, he's just passed away.
No, I'm sorry.
So I said, no, they don't need to come up. So, and I had a gig that night. And
How long ago was this, Fred?
that was just the year after Dad died, so that would be 2003.
Right.
And it's just, I don't know whether it helped that she'd been ill for some time and we kind of knew it was coming, but I just put the game face on and did it. I didn't tell anybody what had happened. I just did the gig and I got through it. You just, maybe sometimes you're speaking the words out loud, you know, rather than selling it, you know.
Yeah.
I don't mean selling it in a, in a
You're
crass kind of way.
You're on autopilot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
With Jack, you know, when Jack was diagnosed, I mean, all my kids, I think, are incredible, but Jack dealt with this incredibly well. You know, I remember him saying something like, you know, he was glad it wasn't his brother because he knew he could handle it better than him.
Yeah, well,
you know, what a thing to say.
Yeah, what a thing to say. And we do often get so much, don't we, from
The
our kids.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about our kids as, you know, resilient, but
Yeah.
they can also be incredibly inspirational
Yeah.
as well, right?
Yeah.
So, Fred, the sort of place of comedy in our life now, you know, the culture of cancellation,
Yeah.
we touched on it a bit earlier in the
You
conversation.
can't say anything these days.
So, what's your approach to it? How do you handle that sort of
Well,
challenge now as a comic?
I think whenever I see somebody saying, oh, you can't say anything these days, I think, well, there's somebody that's not been in a comedy club or gone down to see live stand-up, because all kinds of topics are discussed. My attitude is that if you see it written down in black and white, it doesn't reflect what's the tone, right? A lot of it is, it's intent rather than content, I would say.
Right.
And there is never an intention. For example, in Scotland, we've got the hate crime bill. And I think in the words of the legislation, you have to have the intention of causing hate and a criminal act. So recently I had to go and do a couple of stand-up gigs in one of the great comedy clubs in Glasgow, The Stand. And I said, before we start, I've got the legislation here. Whatever I'm about to say, there is no intention to cause hatred to any of these protected categories, and it's religion,
So you turned it into
sexuality.
You turned it into a joke.
Yeah, sexuality.
But were you actually thinking, I probably should cover my backside with this?
No. I did it because I knew I was working up to a punchline, which unfortunately I'm not going to tell you because
Because it won't be in context.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, and there's people, anybody of a certain sexual persuasion, you've got transgender to think about. And then there was a weird wording in it, which was the appearance of a religion. And I thought, so that gave me a bit of fodder. So I think there was word that Police Scotland had 4,000 complaints or something like that in the first week. I doubt very much if any of it will ever find its way into a court, into a law court. So I think I've never been somebody that's set out to, you know, I've always been more middle of the road than some other stand-up comics. I object hearing people saying, I went to see so-and-so and I walked out. And it's just like, well, you know his reputation or her reputation as well as I do. Why on earth would you have shelled out 25 quid a ticket? Because you went with the intention of being offended. Clearly you were.
But you would defend the right of a comic to be able to
Yeah,
crack whatever joke they want to crack,
I would say so.
as long as it is clear that it's in the context of comedy.
Yeah, and that's something that I know that, you know, Frankie Boyle, who I hugely admire as a writer of comedy, Jimmy Carr has addressed it in his stand-up specials, Ricky Gervais as well. The bottom line, Andy, is if it's funny, you know, if it's getting a laugh, keep it in. That's one of my mottos, in fact. if it gets a laugh, you keep it in. Which I've always said is a great motto for stand-up, but not sex.
Fred MacAulay, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Andy. Enjoyed the chat.
Fred, before I let you go,
Yeah.
we end every episode with my asking the guest for their crisis comforts.
Right.
So this is 3 things. Can't be another person, so can't be alien, I'm afraid.
Right.
That you rely on or have relied on in the difficult times. So be as specific as you like. But what do you sort of lean towards when there's a darker day?
Gosh, that's a tough one. Physically, we've had dogs for 30 years. As much a part of the family as the kids, and obviously it's tragic because they come and go in your life. But no, dogs are a great source of comfort, I suppose.
I'm going
Enjoyment.
to quote our mutual friend Ellis, who says that we should all aim to be the man our dog thinks we are, which I think is one of the great
I'm going to tell you a funny thing I came up with the other night, but that's not for your podcast.
Okay.
So yeah, the dogs. Crikey, I would say memories. We were talking about, missing dead relatives. People that have gone before us. I think that's, what I was saying earlier about wishing that your parents could still enjoy the things that have made your heart warm. So I would say that, just having that and thinking, gosh, what do we know about life? What do we know about the universe? You never know, maybe they are getting some buzz out of the same things that we're getting a buzz out of, but just because they're physically not here. So I would say memories, dogs' memories. What else?
Are you a music lover?
Do you know, it's not something that's huge in my life. I think maybe it's just because comedy has been so big. I've got a collection of vinyl albums, but I don't return to them, for comforts or moments of crisis.
Of your outdoor pursuits, skiing, fishing, golf.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are others shooting.
Skiing's the passion. Absolutely. You can add that in. A snow-covered mountain. Jesus. And I hope they're around for a few more centuries yet, but as I said, we've seen changes in climate, but give me the freedom of an alpine blue sky and a fresh snowfall. You've got a happy man.
Wonderful. Fred MacAulay, thanks again for joining me.
If you've enjoyed this conversation with Fred, then please do leave us a review. And if you found it helpful or even inspiring, we would be delighted if you recommended us to your friends. You can watch the full episodes on YouTube, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and if you hit subscribe, you'll find a load more crisis conversations. As always, full transcripts are available on our website along with links. Just head to crisiswhatcrisis.com. And thank you so much for listening.